It starts with a voicemail, but it feels like a door slamming shut on everything you've known. My name wasn't even mentioned, just a cold, rehearsed message. We're restructuring. You're no longer part of the business. 17 years, countless sacrifices, and I was erased in an instant. It was always my name on the invoices, the balance sheets, and the loan paperwork. But never once did I think they'd take away my seat at the table without a word, without a fight. But this was more than a dismissal. This was a warning. Or was it? It was early in the morning when I heard it, the voicemail. It wasn't the kind of message you expect on an ordinary day. I'd been sipping my coffee, staring at the same half-empty mug that had already gone cold, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't recognize the number, but it was a local one, so I picked it up. What I heard didn't make sense at first. There was no greeting. No hello or hi, Vivian. No warmth, nothing that would show even the slightest hint of familiarity or love. Just a cold, distant voice. Effective immediately, we're restructuring the business, it said. You're no longer part of the company. You'll hear from our attorney soon. That was it. No explanation, no thank you for all the years I had given to the company. No goodbye for everything I had sacrificed. Just a sharp, emotionless statement that ended with silence. I froze. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just heard. But it wasn't sinking in. This wasn't just any business. It was our business. The company my family had built. A legacy I had helped maintain for years. How could they just erase me? I played the message again. And then again, just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. But there it was, louder the second time around. No mention of my name, no acknowledgement of my role in their success. 17 years of hard work, of late nights and early mornings, of decisions I made in the shadows, all of it gone in a single voicemail. The message was short, but it felt like a lifetime in the making. I sat there letting the silence take over, the hum of the refrigerators suddenly louder than anything else. It was strange how in an instant everything I had worked for had evaporated. I didn't call them back. I didn't beg for answers or demand a face-to-face meeting. I just opened my laptop and searched for an email address I'd been meaning to reach out to for a while now. Janet Lynn. I'd met her at a conference in Phoenix a couple of years ago. She was an attorney with a boutique corporate firm, specializing in business transitions. I had kept her card, but I never expected to need it. I typed out a short message. It's time. Let's talk options. No details, no complaints, just the facts. I clicked send and felt the weight of the decision settle in. I didn't know exactly what was next, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't be walking back into that family business, not under their terms. The truth is, I had been with Rhodes Manufacturing for a lot longer than I had been anywhere else. 17 years. 17 long, difficult, rewarding, and painful years. And when you spend that long working for something, you start to think it's yours in some way. Or at least, it should be. I walked into that factory when I was just 21. I was naive, dressed in a suit that didn't fit the rough, gritty environment. My shoes were too shiny for the factory floor. I remember the way one of the line managers chuckled at me, joking that I looked like I was headed to a bank interview instead of a manufacturing plant. But I was determined. I learned the ropes quickly, working my way through procurement, payroll, and eventually running the numbers. I became the person everyone turned to when something needed fixing or when the books didn't balance. My family never gave me a title, but I had one in my head. I was the numbers girl, the silent worker who kept everything running smoothly behind the scenes. My parents, Graham and Elaine, ran the company, but it was always clear to me that it wasn't them who were keeping it afloat, it was me. My grandfather had founded the company, but he was long gone by the time I entered the picture. Graham and Elaine carried on the business, dividing the ownership between themselves. But the thing is, they didn't build it. They didn't save it when things got tough. I did. I kept the company's books balanced, found ways to make ends meet when we were losing clients, and even took out a second mortgage on my own home to keep things running. I did all of this quietly, without asking for thanks or recognition. I didn't mind. I was doing it for the family, for the business, for us. But the more I gave, the more I realized that no matter how much I worked, how much I sacrificed, they never saw me in the same way I saw myself. To them, I was just the person who handled the numbers, a tool, a function, but not someone who truly mattered. That was the hardest part, the knowing that all my effort, all my sacrifices, could never measure up to their expectations. But still, I believed that eventually they'd see me. They had to. After all, how could they not? In the years following, things started to shift. The changes were subtle at first, too small to notice unless you were looking. I'd been with the company so long that I was used to being the invisible force behind everything that worked. But little by little, my role began to fade. At first, it was small things. My access to certain resources was cut off. I wasn't included in some of the high-level planning meetings that I had always attended. My mother told me I was overloaded, that I should focus on what I was good at, numbers, essentially. So I kept doing my job. I stayed in the background, hoping it would pass, but it didn't. One day I received the updated organizational chart, and when I looked at it, I realized my name wasn't on it. I wasn't even mentioned. I asked my mother about it, and she smiled and said, "Viv, don't overthink it. It's just a visual." I wanted to argue. I wanted to ask why they were removing me from the chart, why they were gradually pulling me out of the company I had worked for and saved for so many years. But I didn't. I stayed quiet. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that it wasn't a big deal. But deep down, I knew the truth. Over time, the signs became clearer. I started to notice that my headshot had been removed from the company website. I wasn't listed as CFO anymore, not even as part of the leadership team. Instead, Graham, Elaine, and Zach, my brother who had never once stepped foot in the factory, were all listed with no mention of my role at all. It was like I had disappeared. The harder I worked, the more I was pushed aside, until it felt like I was an invisible cog in a machine I had built. They had stopped valuing me, and I had stopped being needed. It was painful to realize, but I knew it was the truth. The moment I fully grasped that I had been erased from the company wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no grand argument where someone finally said the words that I had feared. It wasn't loud or painful in the way you might imagine. It was quiet, and that made it worse. It started with something simple, a Google sheet. It was the vendor schedule, a document I had painstakingly put together and maintained for years. Every update, every tweak, every time we changed a vendor or updated a contract, it went into that sheet. I was the only one who had access to it. But when I went to open it one morning, the screen flashed an error. Access denied. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe a glitch in the system. But when I checked with Zach, he gave me the brush off. "Oh yeah, we've consolidated finance ops into a different workflow," he said. "Nothing urgent, don't worry about it." Just like that, I was locked out of something I had built, something that had been my responsibility for years. But I didn't push. I didn't demand to be let back in. I simply accepted it, the way I had accepted everything else. A few weeks later, I tried to access the second-floor conference room. My badge didn't work. Again, I assumed it was a technical issue. But when I mentioned it to Elaine, she promised she would look into it. The thing is, she never did. More small things followed. Little, almost imperceptible changes that told me everything I needed to know. Meetings I used to be part of, I was no longer included. Files I had once had full access to, now I couldn't even view them. I was being erased piece by piece, and no one even noticed. Then came the shareholder packet. For the first time in years, it arrived late. Not by a day, but by weeks. And when I opened it, I saw that it was printed, not emailed like usual. The financial schedules were missing, key charts had been altered, and the tone of the document had shifted. It was softer, more optimistic, like they were hiding something. But what really hit me like a slap in the face was the signature block. My name wasn't there. Not even a mention of me in the list of executives or shareholders. It was just Graham, Elaine, and Zach. That was it. I wasn't there. I wasn't part of the family anymore. I wasn't part of the business. I was a ghost. I could feel the weight of the years, the sacrifices, the long hours, the decisions that had kept the company afloat, lifting off me, leaving behind only the sting of betrayal. The realization settled in. I wasn't valued. I wasn't wanted. They had erased me, and they didn't even bother to tell me. I could have confronted them. I could have demanded answers. I could have stormed into that boardroom, thrown everything I had done for this company into their faces, and made them acknowledge me. But I didn't. Instead, I made a decision, a quiet one. I wasn't going to fight for a seat at the table anymore. I wasn't going to beg them to see me again. I reached out to Janet, the lawyer I had met at a conference in Phoenix. She specialized in private equity transitions, something I had never really considered before, but now it felt like the only way forward. I sent her a simple message. Janet, I'm ready to explore options regarding my 40% ownership stake in Rhodes Manufacturing. There have been internal changes. Let me know when would be a good time to talk. I didn't need to explain anything. I didn't owe them an explanation. I didn't need to give Janet any backstory about my family, my role, or the years I had invested. I simply needed to know what my options were. I had spent so long being a silent partner in this family business, but now I was going to take control of my own future. No more waiting, no more hoping they would come around. I was going to make sure that I was never put in a position where I was erased again. The negotiations were quiet, fast, and clean. Janet's firm, along with a team of lawyers, worked quickly to assess my 40% stake in the business. The value was calculated fairly by an independent third-party assessor, and within weeks, the deal was done. There was no drama, no family confrontation, no board vote. It was simple. My stake was transferred to a corporate buyer, Daniel Meyer, a quiet but strategic investor who specialized in acquiring minority stakes in family businesses undergoing transitions. When I signed the final paperwork, it wasn't in some grand conference room. It wasn't at a family dinner table. It was in a small downtown office with no logos, no family crests, and no sentimental quotes about legacy on the walls. Just a polished maple table and the soft sound of pens on paper. The deal was done. By the time my family realized what had happened, it was too late. I had already sold my stake, signed the papers, and walked away. The company had never needed me the way I needed it. They thought I was disposable, but I had a different plan. I had a different way out. And in the silence that followed, I found something I had never expected: freedom. Once the sale went through, the calls started flooding in. At first, it was just a few: Zach, Elaine, and Graham, all trying to reach me. But soon, the messages became frantic. Zach's voice was a constant presence on the other end of my phone, growing more desperate with each call. By day 3, I had over 70 missed calls. He was pacing on the other end of the line, breathless and panicked, as if the company was crumbling without me. "Vivian," he said, his voice cracking, "you don't get it. They're asking for a forensic audit. The buyer's team, they're going line by line through everything. The reports, the contracts, even the vendor files. They've found discrepancies. They found things that could look really bad." He was begging me to step in, to fix it, to undo everything I had just done. "No, Zach," I said calmly. "It sounds like standard due diligence." I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I had made my decision. The company didn't deserve my time anymore, and neither did he. My voice stayed even despite the frantic calls, the chaos on the other end. "They're requesting everything," Zach said, "and the audit, this could destroy everything." I let the silence hang between us for a moment. He didn't understand. He never would. "That's not my problem anymore," I said. "You fix it." And just like that, I hung up. The days after the sale were strange. The phone rang constantly, but I didn't pick up. Zach called more times than I could count. Elaine sent me several emails, each one more formal than the last. And Graham, he never reached out. I suppose he was too proud to admit that I had done what they all thought I wouldn't. Zach, on the other hand, was a different story. His panic was palpable. I could hear it in his voice each time he left a voicemail. He was frantic, asking me to come back, to help them fix the mess I had left behind. I didn't return any of his calls, not at first. And when I did pick up, my response was always the same. I stayed calm, almost emotionless, as I listened to his pleas. "Vivian, please," he begged. "You don't understand what's happening. The buyer's audit team, everything's unraveling. They're going through everything. They're flagging the Texas reports, the vendor contracts, even the restructuring memos. If we don't fix this, it's all over." I listened, but I didn't respond the way he expected. I didn't get angry. I didn't apologize. I didn't ask for anything in return. I simply told him what he needed to hear. "I'm not coming back, Zach," I said, "and frankly, it's your problem now. I'm out." He kept trying, day after day, message after message. But each time I didn't respond, he grew more desperate, more incoherent. He wanted me to fix it. He wanted me to undo what I had done, to come back and put things right. But I wasn't interested in fixing what had already been broken. Zach's calls grew more panicked as the audit continued, and every time I heard his voice, it reminded me of how much of my life I had spent trying to please people who would never truly see me. He had asked me to fight for the business when I had already walked away. But what was left to fight for? They had erased me from everything that mattered. Then, one morning, I received an email from Elaine. It was a single line. "Can we meet privately?" No lawyers. I didn't reply. I printed the email and slid it into a folder. It was labeled "After." I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need closure. The meeting she wanted, whatever it was, had no bearing on my decision. My path had already been set. There was nothing left to say. When you've been erased, when your presence has been reduced to nothing, sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away quietly, without the need for any final confrontation. So I did, and in doing so, I gave myself the freedom I had spent years looking for. A few weeks passed in the quiet I had created. I had cut ties. I was no longer looking over my shoulder, hoping for a call, an acknowledgement, or even an apology. Then, out of nowhere, a package arrived at my door. It was small, plain, and unmarked. Just a brown padded envelope. When I opened it, I found a photo frame. The same one that used to sit on the console table in the main office at Rhodes Manufacturing. It was the photo of our family, the one we used to put on display for everyone to see. We stood together in front of the old warehouse, smiling like we had built something monumental together. Back then, it felt like we had. But now, when I looked at the picture, I noticed something different. The glass had a small crack running through it, right across my face. It wasn't shattered. It wasn't a deliberate act of destruction. It was just worn. Like time had taken its toll on the image, and in doing so, had erased me. I stared at the frame for a while. It felt like the final slap in the face, an acknowledgement of what they had done. But it wasn't anger I felt, it was just emptiness. I didn't hang the frame up. I didn't keep it on my desk. Instead, I placed it in a drawer, closed the drawer softly, and walked away. I didn't need to fix it. I didn't need to hang it up and pretend like things hadn't changed. I didn't even need to keep it. I let it go. It was the final act of erasure, but it was also the final act of release. I had walked away from that family, from that business, and I had done so with quiet finality. There was no drama, no rage, no need for closure. Just a choice to let go of what no longer served me. The weeks that followed my exit were oddly peaceful. I didn't wake up with a sense of dread in my stomach. I didn't check my phone every few minutes, waiting for another call from Zach or a text from Elaine. Instead, I found myself with space to breathe. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding the weight of the world on my shoulders. I took time for myself. I walked through my days without the constant pressure to fix someone else's mistakes. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I didn't have a full calendar. I didn't have to worry about board meetings or crisis control. I was no longer someone's safety net. I was free. It wasn't a loud freedom. It wasn't dramatic. There was no triumphant moment where everything changed in an instant. But in the stillness, in the quiet that followed the chaos, I realized that I had finally let go. And that was the most powerful thing I could have done. I thought I would feel grief, maybe sadness, or even anger, but I didn't. What I felt was space, mental and emotional space. For the first time, I was just me again. And it was liberating. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them pay. It was about me, about my choice, about walking away from a business that had used me until I wasn't needed anymore, and finding a way to reclaim myself. In the end, the silence was what set me free. It wasn't the loud noise of confrontation or revenge. It was the quiet acceptance that I was no longer tied to a past that didn't want me. It was stepping into my own power, on my own terms. The family thought they had erased me, but all they did was make me harder to manipulate. And in the end, I found peace in that.